There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioner's future. This is just one of them. Hey, it is Wednesday, time for another Rise of the Humans live stream. It has been a very interesting week. We have been doing a number of things here at Rise of the Humans HQ. Mostly, we've been dreaming about the doors coming slightly open. And as we emerge tentatively, slowly, step by step, bleary-eyed into the bright sunshine of the post-lockdown world. Joining me this week, we have the ever wonderful Gary Burt. How are you doing, Gary?
I am good. Good to see you.
You made any ventures outside this week, Gary?
Absolutely not. I'm
good to hear.
To lockdown and staying inside.
Good answer. And really, the focus of today is looking at, as we emerge into this post-lockdown period, we wanted to spend some time looking at leadership in particular, because one of the things I think most organizations are challenged with now is this complicated collection of issues about how do we reopen, how do we get back to a place where we can do business, what does business even look like now, how do our employees feel about coming back to work, and more importantly, how do our customers feel? And on that context of leadership, it's brilliant that we're able to be joined tonight by the fabulous Aid McCormack. How are you doing, Aid?
I'm good, thank you, Dave. Glad to be on here.
How's leadership been for you over the past few weeks? You've been able to lead much?
Oh, not too much personally, other than self-leadership, I guess. But I have been working on a book regarding sort of public sector leadership. And this is not a plug because I won't be associated directly with it. But I've been getting to speak to some of the world's leaders about how leadership needs to change. So my focus, if you like, is not just private sector, but public sector as well.
Oh, interesting. Well, I hope we might get a little bit of insight from that as we go through. So before we go through, one of the things I love about the internet is every now and then, from time to time, the internet just gives you one of life's most joyous gifts. And it could be anything. It could be a little story. It could be something funny. Regular listeners and regular viewers will know that we've long held a narrative about the challenge of algorithmic bias, and I have bored you, many of you, with the story of how I once stood in front of the UK Science and Technology Committee and explained the concept of algorithmic bias using the concept of making tea. Because at the time I was spending quite a lot of time in North America and in the UK, and I explained there are two different algorithms for how you make tea. And actually, you kind of want to know whose algorithm you're going to use to make the tea, because you may choose a different beverage as a result. Look at what the internet gave me today.
Hey guys, so I got a lot of questions after my last video, and everyone wanted to see me make hot tea or British tea. So today we are going to
hot tea, British tea.
So fill our mug with water.
Just
put
no.
it in the microwave.
No. Stop.
Set it for a minute.
Stop now.
Pour the
oh
milk
my
in.
God.
Drop your tea bag in. Add the sugar. Give it a little stir. And that's how you make hot tea.
Seriously. Now, words fail me at this point. Now, I get that may be a wind-up, but there in 30 seconds in a TikTok video is entirely my point. You need to know who's making the algorithm, because if they're using that kind of algorithm, trust me, you're buying coffee. So look, I couldn't resist putting that in. I also, just in terms of housekeeping and plugs, I've been banging on about this webinar, or the anti-webinar I've been working on with a wonderful client called Tealium. We actually delivered it last Thursday, and if you get a chance, it's well worth a look. It's a bit slower than this, but I thought I'd give you a sense of it. Remember, this was a client who wanted to lean into the fact that some webinars are a bit rubbish and a bit boring, and all right, so they bought me, so that was part of the problem. But we then had a very different dialogue, very sort of different, try to bring the audience in and engage the audience in a conversation. If you get a chance, it'd be great if you could have a look. I'll send the link to you. But again, celebrate clients who want to work in innovative ways and do different things. And speaking of different things, how brilliant. I have great news, people. We've got a sponsor. Fantastic. So 7 weeks in, and we have a fantastic sponsor from a company called Treble 3, who I have to tell you have had a relationship with the Envisioners ever since we started 10 years ago. Treble 3 are a design and print company. They will do your website, they will do your banner stands, they will also do your COVID-19 return to work signs. An amazing company to work with. They will help you design, they will help you bring to market anything, and they're just lovely to work for. This is actually, if you look on stage, they did the artwork on the slide, they did the banner stands, they even do tablecloths, believe it or not. You can imagine tea time in the Coplin household is a joy with a very own Rise of the Humans tablecloth. So check them out, treble3.co.uk, for all your printing needs, banner stands, exhibitions, you name it, you know it, you love it, they do it. And thank you so much, Treble 3, for being supportive to the journey that we're on. So let's get to the meat of today's conversation. We talked about the doors starting to open. We see certain shops here in the UK are starting to open. Some kids are going to school. Maybe they're not. Who knows? It's Wednesday today. So today they're not going to school. Tomorrow it could be anything else. People are tentatively returning to their offices. And I would imagine that many of the leaders in these organizations are thinking very thoughtfully about what they should do going forward. And certainly most of the organizations I've been involved with are thinking of this in terms of three distinct phases. They're thinking about the lockdown phase, they're thinking about reopening, and then they're thinking what I call P squared N squared, because I can't bring myself to say the post-pandemic new normal. So P squared N squared, that from now on, please. And for me, it was brought up very well in this really brilliant, let me see if I can bring it to you here, article from the Harvard Business Review way back at the beginning of May that started to map out some of these challenges and talking about a very different approach to leadership throughout these three phases. One of the reasons why I was very pleased to have Aid with us is Aid's been thinking about this, well, for a long time, and certainly pre-COVID, in terms of the different styles of leadership organizations need, but also specifically within the context of COVID. And he had a really good article about the super resilient leader. And I think that concept of resilience is really, really important. So I'm going to bring the guys into the conversation now. And Aid, I really would love to start with you. If you think about those three phases, if you think about lockdown, so the period in which we're trying to understand what's going on and we're closing the business down, the period that we're in now, which is reopening, so most of the businesses I'm working with are looking at what do they need to do, what do they need to do legally, what do they need to do from a customer standpoint, what do they need to do to help keep their employees safe and confident. And then some are getting beyond that now and looking to, okay, so once we're open, then what? If you think about leadership and resilience, Aid, do you think that each one of those phases requires a distinctly different style of leadership?
I guess my view is that, zooming out a little bit, essentially COVID-19 was the official, if you like, or unofficial closing ceremony for the industrial age. So simply coming back to work, so to speak, with the old model, with perhaps people a little further apart, and maybe thinking, oh, I've got to be a bit more efficient now, so I'll sprinkle some digital technologies across my business, and then I'm good to go for the new normal, next normal, subsequent normal, etc., 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 P2N2, is not going to cut it. So we're going to see some major changes. We've seen the digital tsunami come, and it's still coming to many industries. We're now seeing a biological tsunami, and it wasn't man-made, but there's some man-made ones coming in the form of synthetic biology, genetics, and so on. So these disruptions are not going to be events that take place within long periods of steady states. It's just going to be a rocky ride from here on in. So being able to adapt to just a constant state of flux and increasing volatility requires a whole new different model.
That's great. And do you think, I mean, based on your experience to date, do you think many businesses are ready for that? I mean, typically, maybe this is playing to stereotypes, but a lot of the leaders I know, they're kind of one kind of leader or another. They're not all of them. Do you think organizations are going to be challenged with that?
Well, I guess that you've got your kind of industrial leaders and your post-industrial leaders, and your industrial leaders tend to take the view that only a handful of people can be leaders and they make all the decisions. So all the other people in the organization are automatons. They tend to believe that process trumps everything. So it's all about polishing the factory pipes. And they also believe that past successes are a strong indicator of future successes. None of that holds anymore. So those leaders are going the way of the dinosaurs. The problem is that the business schools and the publications around leadership are still pumping out the old messages. They're too invested in the, if you like, the content that they've built to radically pivot. And therefore we have a problem in terms of how we generate the next wave of leaders. But of course there are leaders tainted by this, and they run unicorn companies and startups and are not playing by the rules. But we do have a serious pandemic in terms of old school leadership.
Gary, let me bring you in there. I mean, does that echo what you're saying? In business, is there this very much sort of industrial versus digital separation? Is that where the boundary lies?
I think what Aid said, I'd completely agree with. I mean, I read the article; it's brilliant. It talks about the super resilient organization. Absolutely, you're not designing for a new normal in the sense that the new normal will be static. You're designing for an ever-changing, ever-flexible future. The other point I'd pick out, I think Aid's doing is probably praising the industrial leader. They weren't leaders; they're managers. The group that's going to be really challenged here are the manager who doesn't understand empowerment, the manager who doesn't understand devolved authority, and that doesn't understand. I think this is a really big difference. We've been here many times, but the difference between a leader and a manager. If you're a manager, you are going to be in real trouble. You're not going to be able to exercise the control. You're going to be seen as massively insensitive because a lot of people are going to need a different type of support. Empathy is going to become really important. So if you're looking for that command and control, the levers that you had are gone. And actually, even if you wanted to use those levers, they're not going to be seen as acceptable, not just by HR, but also by the rest of the organization and your customers. So I think industrial managers are going to have, and age-right leaders, but they're going to have a challenge.
So does that leave us with a problem in the middle of the organization again? The middle managers. This is time and time the conversation comes back to these people who are in the sort of midsection of the organization who are, and we play to stereotypes and generalizations. We're not shy of that, but typically the managers who are less confident, have less experience, and more likely to rely on command and control rather than empowerment. Is that so? So we're back there again.
I think there are a couple of things. One is the top of the organization needs to be very clear about what its values are and what's acceptable and not acceptable. Good companies come out very quickly with clear statements around those positions. The ones which we are now viewing as leading companies were the ones which came out and said, this is normal. If you don't want to come into the office for a year, that's fine. You have childcare, you can't make all the meetings. That's good. That's setting the boundaries. And that means that it's either going to be really empowering for those middle leaders or really challenging for the managers. And the organization is going to have to make some decisions. What type of company do you want to be? And those people in the middle that are the industrial managers, you're either going to have to retrain or you're going to have to rehire.
But let me play sort of devil's advocate, Aid, and aren't those industrial managers the ones that would have helped us in that first phase, in the lockdown phase? Aren't they the ones that would have been better placed to get things sorted quickly than the post-industrial digital empowerment managers?
Well, I think if you're essentially running a factory, the job of the manager is to wave the stick or the carrot or beat the drum to get reluctant workers to work, because industrial work is fundamentally unpleasant. And, given that most people are paid for their activity as opposed to their performance, they will typically try and do as little as possible and still get paid. So the idea of a manager as essentially a task manager or a process manager, that's kind of going out the window, because we're moving into the gig economy. And the gig economy means that my performance during this gig will totally depend on whether I get another gig. So I'm more motivated to do a great job than any manager, than any business owner. So we don't need managers in now. We need leaders and we need talent.
Okay, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I absolutely buy into that, but that's a massive leap for a lot of organizations. And my organizational favorite, the corporate dashboard that is measuring by process and sales, none of the things that you've talked about are typically on that dashboard. Surely that has to change then as part of this.
Imagine a dashboard, a corporate dashboard that has not just things like market share, sales, etc., but has failure velocity or number of concurrent experiments. And you go to any typical industrial era organization and ask what those numbers are. They'll be, probably approximately 0, whereas somewhere like Facebook, it'll be approximately 100,000.
But surely experimenting now is absolutely the wrong time to be experimenting, right?
Well, you're either going to play a short-term game, and of course you have, because you have the market perhaps to answer to. But again, we are in transition. We are in between epochs, so to speak, and we're entering an epoch now where the synthetic certainty of the industrial era has gone. We have armies of anxious citizens, anxious employees, who are not going to kind of they'll probably grab whatever job they can grab. But by the same token, if they can see that the company over there is looking for a genuinely talented person and they have a greater sense of purpose and they're more innovative and more responsive to the customer and so on, we'll gravitate over there. And in a sort of Darwinian manner, the worst customers will be associated with the worst companies and the worst employees. So there will be a kind of race upwards, so to speak. And that race upwards won't just be amongst a number of companies in a given country. We'll start to see talent super hubs around the world, and they're already starting to form. And if your city is not part of that talent super hub network, then you are facing becoming an economic backwater. And I appreciate I'm zooming out on your very specific questions.
Yeah, well, and I was being a bit cheeky because it was a trick question as well. And for me, I would imagine that now is entirely the absolute most important time to experiment, because you need to find out. I love many brands, but I did get an email from McDonald's today, and what I loved about that was, McDonald's, out of all of the, and remember, I'm sort of heavily invested in hospitality, so I pay attention to this stuff. Out of many of the hospitality brands, McDonald's is the one who's regular communication. This is what we're doing. This is what you can expect. Today's message, however, was, right, we're doing this, but we really don't know. So we'd love you to tell us what is it that you want from us. And I just thought, bold move and smart, because they're worried about their employees. The conversation, I thought Christian last week made a really lovely point about, this sort of thing about retail, all sectors will face this, but retail in particular. One vendor tells its employees to wear face masks, and another vendor of similar goods says its employees don't need to wear face masks. As a customer, which shop would you feel more comfortable going into? Don't know, not looking for an answer, but actually these are the dynamics. And I think unless you're testing and unless you're engaging both your employees and your customers, what chance do you stand? Gary, do you think that's that sort of engagement? Do you think, let me ask you not the trick question now, is that the way forward? Is it really is this open engagement that we have to have now?
I think the first thing on McDonald's specifically, two things. One, I'm amazed I got your email address off you, and you're inviting comms. So well done to. Second one is I saw their advert last night on the TV. They absolutely smashed it. clear graphics, clear message, not about the sell. It was about communication with their customers. Brilliant. That was a textbook example in how to get it right. We keep talking about the new normal, and I think one of the shifts that we perhaps need to look below when we go below the managers is these changes are going to impact employees as well. And picking on what Aid said, the best employees are going to find that there is a global talent pool. You have a group of it. There are good organizations are going to search the globe to find the best people. Now, here's the thing which is also going to change from this. If you're in an organization and it suddenly starts looking globally, if you're a very task-driven, high overhead, non-self-managing employee, you're suddenly going to find that life is going to start to get tough. So, I think for those there are going to be people out there going, look, I'm finding this quite difficult. One of the things I do fear is that there is going to be a group of people who are going to need to themselves go, I need to retrain myself. I need to make sure I can prioritize. I need to make sure I can deliver without being told what to do. I know I need to be able to self-learn. There's a whole range of capabilities that are not going to come down the organization that good employees and those who really want to sustain their employment and be attractive are going to need to develop. So that creativity, that self-empowerment, that's something I think we're skirting over, but it will come.
No, I like that, and we actually hadn't had a chance to talk about this, but Aid, I know you have a YouTube channel about career disruption, and so I guess did you have a perspective on that about sort of the change in career in terms of the core skills that people will need?
I think Gary's spot on. I actually think there's too much emphasis placed on skills. Skills, of course, get the job done, but when you don't know what the job to be done is, there's no point. You can go and qualify yourself senseless, but we don't know what the future requires. But your ability to be able to learn, your ability to be resilient in the face of an uncertain future, your ability to act as a business unit, the ability to create your own brand and be service oriented and so on. These sorts of, if you like, traits and capabilities are going to be extremely important. In my view, careers are dead. Careers were an industrial era concept, a bit like retirement and weekends, whereby there was so much synthetic certainty that you could guarantee somebody a place in your company and you would create a path for them to keep them engaged enough to stick around. We're in a post-career world now. It's all about treating your professional life as if you are a lean startup. You can have a lot of passion, you can have a lot of competence, but if there's no market, you've got a very time-consuming hobby.
So let me ask a really loaded question then, and clearly I have a massive bias for the answer here. So do you think we're past the point now where people can wear their ignorance of technology like a badge of honor, like some people have done for the last 20 years? And, these are the people in the office who will happily admit, don't know nothing about computers, like that's a great thing. Do you think that will now just be like, seriously, dude, that's not going to work? Or do you think that's still going to exist?
Well, I think, I think this is probably a characteristic of the UK in particular, but in certain countries, actually, that would be seen as a kind of, so you can't write. It's that level of a problem. And I think that's going to become increasingly apparent. And leaders who don't get digital in the technology sense are going to be, of limited value, so to speak. Their ability to look at something like, 3D printing or even quantum computing and not conclude that it's a toy that the IT department can go and play with, to recognize that it will become a threat and eventually become table stakes to playing in this industry. There's very few of those leaders.
Yeah, totally.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we've talked for a while about innovation being a key capability. That's absolutely the case now. But it's also about more. It's about the ability to get things done, the ability to execute. And this applies to leaders, and it also applies to employees. This is not just a leadership trait. And I think we're going to see a blurring of that employee leader role, because if I'm working within a team, I don't want to have to direct the team. What I want to do is agree on what the end goal is, but actually work with a team who are going to go out, who are going to make those connections, who are going to form those teams. The one thing I don't want to hear, and this is going to be quite glib, is I can't do it. I know you can't do everything. What I want is your ability to connect and go and help and go and find and go and understand and learn how to get that done. So, everybody isn't going to be an expert, but you are going to be increasingly, as we see leadership devolve, you are increasingly going to be empowered in the best organizations to go and say, right, I can deliver this. I need this and this. These things I can do. This resource I need, and these skills I don't have. Here's how I want to do them. Am I okay to go? The future of the organization is going to be, right, the leader, off you go, do it. That's it. It will not be, give me a 20-page summary. It will not be do an RFP. It will be, okay, you are empowered, go. That's the big shift.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think there's a big problem with empowerment because it upsets my learned helplessness model of just doing what I'm told and not taking any responsibility for the outcome. I like the idea of the empowered, you could call it ubiquitous leadership approach. I like to think of it in terms of the relationship with your boss being less one that's around dancing around the contract and getting away with as little as possible, and more of coach and athlete. So, an athlete that says to their coach, I can't do it, the coach might turn around and say, well, what is it you want to do? Let's agree on something, and then let's move forward in a manner that's beneficial to all parties. Now, once you get the trust in place and you get a shared sense of vision, then you're into a very intimate situation whereby the coach will measure your heart rate or how long it takes you to run around the track. Now, for those of us of a certain age, if that model was applied to our employer or the organization we worked for, we would regard this as seriously invasive. But in fact, another way of looking at it is that this is what performance enhancement is all about. We are now becoming cognitive athletes, and organizations that are going to be successful in the future are going to effectively be cognitive gymnasiums.
So there's a lot of humanity in what you're talking about there in terms of leadership. I'm hearing a lot less of the hard and fast, we're here to make money and we're here to do the number, all that sort of stuff, and a lot more empathy. What's that going to be like? How do you take organizations or individuals more specifically on a journey to empathy, to help them connect to how they best empower other people, but also how to build that in themselves so that they're able to see things, to be able to let go, to have the confidence to let go?
I'm not sure that you can put people on a sheep dipping training course and all of a sudden they come out the other end with empathy. But of course, you can teach a sociopath empathy in order for them to get the results that they're looking for. So it's all doable. You can fake it till you make it, so to speak, and then be very pleasantly surprised that, empathy seems to work on my people, as it were. The profit motive is absolutely fine, but you might consider it a form of wealth distribution to be more focused on stakeholder value than shareholder value. And therefore, we need leaders who care about the community and the planet and overall well-being and so on. Now, of course, that's a tricky one to sell to the city. But as soon as investors and analysts start turning their noses up at pure profit engines, we will see some sort of re-engineering, redesigning of the stock market. I'm not saying that's going to happen overnight, but that certainly appears to be the trend.
I think another point for this is that analysts do look really carefully. One of the things about social media, not all social media, LinkedIn, professional media, is it starts to give a lot of transparency into people. And analysts are increasingly being given the tools to look at companies. Who is hiring the top talent? Who is losing this? So previously that was a metric they couldn't tie into. If I wanted to look at the best companies, I can look at the balance sheet. I'm also going to look at LinkedIn. I'm also going to look at Glassdoor and Vault. I'm going to say, what are the people saying? Where do the very best want to work? Where are the best going? Are they hiring those people? Are they keeping them? Are they losing them? So there's a whole range of human metrics that a few years ago were inaccessible. Nowadays, they're completely transparent. And I think that these are going to become more important. We've heard for many years that when people go to venture capitalists, the biggest factor in them getting the resource approved is the quality of the person and the team doing the application. So even if the idea sucks, is the team something that's going to be successful? And even if the idea is brilliant, if the team can't execute it, then no one's going to back it. So I think we're going to see that human capital. Now, good analysts and good VCs have done this for years. What we're going to see is we're going to see some rigor and metrics put around this. And organizations that dismiss this, they're going to just find a very hard time, because they're going to be in this vicious loop. If you're not looking after the people, you're not going to keep them. Therefore, your results are not going to get better. And we'll see the same virtuous loop on the other side. Great companies will attract the best people around the world, and they will improve. So companies can make a decision, which loop do you want to go on, going up or going down?
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. Now, listen, guys, we're at time, and I want to get one final thought from you, and I will buy you some time to think of it. Basically, the leaders that we talked about today are all facing a very similar prospect. They're all trying to navigate their organization out of lockdown period. I'd love the one thing that you think they should make most important, the one thing that you need to do. And I'll start, right? And I think the challenge right now for a lot of leaders, a lot of organizations, is the employees assume that the leaders have all of the answers, when quite often they don't. And again, the organizations I'm involved in, there's lots of unknowns about how to reopen, about what may happen going forward, about the level of business that's still there, all that sort of stuff. And I think the single most important thing a leader can do today is simply be visible and to engage in conversation. So, if you have the chance to engage with your employees, that I think can have the most positive effect in everything you're doing, helping you get everybody behind you and showing them that you don't know all of the answers. I think is massively going to be massively helpful to your future. Gary.
Oh, thanks. You just said everything that's really good. One, on a personal level, you can do this, but it works at a company level. Be the sort of, if you wanted to be a manager or leader, be the leader you want to be. If you're in charge of a company, you need to set the goal to be the type of company you want to be. And there's a really simple exercise. The decisions you're making today are going to determine where you are in a year or 2 years. Think, in 2 years' time, have I made the best decision that I could think now? Don't do it with a short-term view. Do it with the view of, am I making the best decision that is going to be, I'm going to look on this and I made the best decision, the right decision I could for what we wanted to do. And the reason for doing that is because the right decision, you might need to make some tough choices now. We shouldn't sugarcoat the fact that people are going to lose their positions. It's going to get tough in the next few weeks and months. Are people going to put in equitable policies around this? Are they going to put in generous and at least human processes that allow people to exit and feel that they've not been hurt by that? So it's about being very, very clear to me on the type of company you want to be judged against.
That's great. Aid, over to you.
You've left me with nothing.
There's always something, Aid.
I would encourage leaders to focus on growing assets rather than making a profit. I think there's two very underexploited asset classes: data, which we haven't talked about, and human capital, which we have. I think there's some real opportunity there. And to Gary's point, if we can work out how to articulate our human capital, our cognitive capital on a balance sheet, then all of a sudden I think the world will move in the right direction.
That's great. Well, listen, on that note, I'm going to leave it there. So thank you, Gary. Thank you, Aid, for joining us. And thank you, dear audience, for being with us as always. It's always a pleasure to have you along with us. We will be back with you again next week, same time, same Bat channel. If you haven't subscribed, we'd love you to subscribe, and you would love us to be part of the subscription, because you too will benefit from the quality content that we put out week after week. Thanks again. Have a great week. Keep safe, keep well, and we'll see you next week.
There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioner's future. This is just one of them.